behalf of Shifu, will say thank you very much for coming, and it's wonderful to see a nice turnout 5 years later, and I think that's also a testament to Yechezkel was. And unbelievable how time flies. Another year, and I just want to mention, I think I said this last year, that the Indian are getting together, Yortzeit, and a year later, year to year, the Indian get together for Chizik, for us to remember the Nifter, and we're supposed to, I mentioned this last year, we're supposed to take some of the wonderful qualities that he had, and we're supposed to incorporate it into our own Avodas Hashem. There's a Rashi that actually, there was a Seder that we had, Chumash Rashi Seder, we had the last year, the year before we started learning Chumash and Rashi together. Consistently, some weeks, some parashiyas, I think it was Sefer Bereshis was very consistent. Sefer Shmos was the year before in Parashas B'Shalach. So this was a Rashi that very much Yechezkel was very fond of. When Moshe Rabbeinu, Klal Yisrael is at Yam Suf, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Vayomer Hashem el Moshe, Matitzak Elai, Daber el Bnei Yisrael Yisrael. Fascinating Rashi. Also a tremendous Yisod in Hashkafa, where Rashi tells us, Lamadnu, Chazal, Shoyim Moshe, Oymiru Mispala. Of course, Tefillah. What's great? What better plan right now? Klal Yisrael's in the Tzara. This seems to be the Tzorech Hasha Tefillah. Kadosh Baruch Hu says, Ma titzak elai. Amalai Kadosh Baruch Hu lo eis ata laharis b'tefillah. She'Yisrael nesunim b'tzara. Very strange. Yisrael's nesunim b'tzara. Now's not the time to be married with tefillah. I would think this is it. Tefillah is going to win it up. No. There's some times where you need to take positive action. Yechezkel used to like this very much because as much ruchni as tefillah, tefillah is the first thing and stuff, but you also, it has to be followed up by lemaisa and action. It's something which is something very much he was excelled at, not just talking and even davening, and also actually putting it to actually being the hishtadlus aspect when it was very much needed. And I think also one other thing I do want to mention, where the time happens to be elections this week. I don't know if there's an Indian to talk about Bechlal, what people should be doing. Everyone should have their own role of what they should be doing in terms of the vote. But the concept, we go to Bechiros, we go to elections, we want to elect officials that are going to represent us for our personal needs and the needs, of course, of Klal Yisrael. And a Chaver Knesset, a person who's working for the Klal, this is a very, very, very important position. And again, this is something also Yechezkel we used to talk about very much a lot, about the Indian of community work and Klal work, and Yechezkel, this is something that should inspire us. Yechezkel excelled. Yechezkel, very much understood that there are certain things that people who have certain talents for the tzibur have to go out and have to not only, right, they have to take care of, they have to worry about the tzibur, they have to put in time and energy when there's things that the tzibur could benefit from. I think we mentioned, maybe it was a year ago, the Chazal, the Mishnah in Rosh Hashanah, which talks about Yom Adin. The Mishnah there says that in Rosh Hashanah everyone passes in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, B'nei Maroi, and it says there in the Mishnah, V'kulan niskarin b'skira achas. Everyone is observed in one look, one glance. And I don't know who it was, one of the Mefarshim explains that the Mishnah is referring to another aspect in Avodas Hashem, which a person is judged on Rosh Hashanah. Besides the Maisim Tovim, Mitzvahs, Averis, that a person has to give an accounting for, there's also the Inyan Kulan Niskorim B'skira Achas, is how does that person relate to the Klal, as everyone. He sees them B'skira Achas, that everyone has to give an accounting, what is his contribution regarding the Klal. And that's something, when we get together, we have to remember that it's something that each of us should makabel on ourselves. How much more can we do for the Klal? That's something I'm sure that Yechezkel very much would want me to say tonight. Mitzvah Shem, we have our guest speaker, who comes every year, Dovid Orlofsky. But before and tonight, I'd like to ask Rabbi Yosef Weiss, Mitzvah Shem, future Mechlutin, right, to say a few words.
Right. Shmua Tov, everybody. Good to welcome. Rabbi touched on a point that I was actually going to speak about tonight, and let's see if we could go a little bit more in depth with this midah of Yechezkel. I spoke at the bar mitzvah about a connection between Moshe Rabbeinu and Yosef HaTzadik. So we see that in this week's parsha, Moshe Rabbeinu, while everybody is busy themselves collecting from all the mitzvim to be mekayim the shavua that the Rebbeinu Shalom made to the others, to Avram Avinu, that when the Jews leave Mitzrayim, they'll leave with a rechush. But it says over there that Moshe Rabbeinu was busied himself with Atzmas Yosef. So it says over there that at the beginning of the parsha, it says, "Vayikach Moshe Atzmas Yosef Yimoi, ki hashpia es bnei Yisrael lemor, b'choi gifkoi le'elihim eschem, ve'lisim es atmatzai mizeh itchem." So here we see Moshe Rabbeinu is being mekayim a shavua that Yosef HaTzadik placed upon Bnei Yisrael. So the Or Chaim touches on the point of Pekod Yifkadata, why he used a double lashon when he made the shavua. So we see the shavua dafka was the last statement that Yosef made to his brothers in Parshas Vayechi, where it says, "Vayishba Yosef es bnei Yisrael lemor pekod yifkad elohim eschem ve'lisim es atmotzai mizeh." And there we see that Yosef is talking to his brothers, and Yosef tells his brothers that when you leave, make sure that you take me with you. So the Or Chaim says that in the double lashon, because there were two guarantees. One, the HaKadosh Baruch Hu was going to redeem us from the sevel of Mitzrayim, and that we would be so busy wanting to leave because we were there in Avdus. And the second one is that he knew that Klal Yisrael would be busying themselves being the kind of the Shavua to the Rebbeinu Shalom, and he didn't want that they should forget him, because they're going to be so busy collecting all this money and becoming rich that they shouldn't forget him. And after we see that it's Moshe Rabbeinu that goes to be Mekayim the Shavua. The Shavua, Moshe Rabbeinu not only took the Atmas of Yosef, but he also took all the Shvatim with him. The Shavua that was made is a koch of Dibur. The first Shavua that we find that's made in Klal Yisrael is when Avram Avinu makes Eliezer take a Shavua that he will bring a Kala for Yitzchak, and that he'll only take from his family. And there, when Avram makes the Shavua, when he tells Eliezer to make the Shavua, Sim Yod Chatachas Yerechi. So Rashi says, because Toifis Lechefetz, Kedusha, there's a Kedusha, and by him holding the Kedusha, it's Mekayim the Shavua. We find another time in the Torah where a similar lashon is made, and that's when Yaakov Avinu calls Yosef, and he tells Yosef that he wants him to bury him at Marsa Machpelah. And at that Shavua, also Yaakov says to Yosef, he says the same lashon, Sim no yodcha tachas yirechi, vasisim od yichesed ve'emes, al no tikvarein v'mitzrayim. So we find over there an interesting ma'aseh that Yosef doesn't listen to his father. He doesn't put his hand metachas yirechi over there. It says in the pasuk, Vayomer anochi eseh kidvarecha. Yosef says, I'll do what you tell me to do. So Yaakov says to him, Hishavali, swear to me. Vayishav, and he swears to him. So, what happens here that Yosef doesn't do as Eliezer did? Why doesn't he put his hand, Metachas Yirechi, Tfisa v'chefetz kedusha t'mekayim b'shavua? So Yosef teaches something to Yaakov Avinu, that the shavua that Eliezer had to take was, Eliezer was an Eved. And for an Eved to be Mekayim the Shavua, so the Eved had to hold something Kedusha in order that he should be able to Mekabel the Shavua upon himself. But we're Klal Yisrael. We're a Bria Chadasha. We have the Kedusha, the Neshama, that the Rebbeinu Shalom has given to us through the Torah, that Dibur is enough. So Yaakov said, if that's the case, Hishavali, then swear to me, verbally. So he swore to him verbally. And at that point, Klal Yisrael learned the koach of using the lashon before the Maisa. To first say the dibur, and then from the dibur comes the Maisa. That's Yechezkel Isser. Yechezkel Isser had a koach, but by him, he was one step ahead. Yechezkel not only had the koach of Dibur, but he had the koach of Dibur and Maisa together. And that koach was in his pen, the koach of writing. And we all know that when you hear something, you could forget it. It hits home for the time that you're listening to it, but to remember it, if it didn't hit hard enough, you forget. But when you see something, then it makes a roshan. And Yechezkel's Maisa, before he put it into a physical Maisa of actually doing it, he wrote it. And by writing it, he set it into action. About a few months after Yechezkel passed away, Shifra was cleaning the house, and she found behind, I think the toy box or something, she said, she found 6 envelopes. And on each envelope there was a name. And Baruch Hashem, one of the envelopes had my name on it. I just wanted to read you a letter that Yechezkel wrote shortly before he passed away. I had a car accident at the beginning of that year, Elosman. And Yechezkel was there all the time, as always. Anytime something happened in our family, Yechezkel was always there. Within seconds, not even minutes. This is the koach, one of the very, very powerful koachos of Yechezkel. Dear Yosef, 18 years of friendship, the Yedidus HaNefesh. Thank you for being there for me as a dear friend. You were gifted in so many ways. The most profound gift of yours is your sensitivity to humanity towards others. Your blatant honesty has kept me honest, and I am thankful to have a straight shooter as a Yedid Nefesh. I nearly lost you this year, and the thought scared me. I cannot fathom my world without Yosef in it. Hashem should watch over you, Rivka, and the kids. May you continue to grow, to be your special self, and may Hashem bless you with all this and all that you need, and the time and the ability to enjoy this bracha to the fullest, in loving friendship and brotherhood, Yechezkel. Yechezkel had a way, and has a way, as always, to make a roshan, and to keep that roshan alive through his wife, through his children, through Klal Yisrael. For all of us that remember him, for all of us that were blessed to be part of his life, and for all of us that are being blessed to be a continuous part of his life. We should all learn and grow from him, and in his merit, we should all be zochet to see the Binyan Beis HaMikdash in our times.
I was invited to be a speaker at a breakfast in for NCSY in West Hempstead on a Sunday morning some years ago. And before I get up to speak, a mother of one of the children got up to speak. And she spoke for about 15 minutes. And she told what NCSY had done for her family. And she had told what he'd done for the daughter, and done for her personally. And she told some extremely moving stories. And she started to cry. And the whole room was crying. And when she sat down, the person sitting next to me said, "Well, there's nothing left to say, is there?" And he left. So anyone who would like to leave it, I certainly understand. And, it's so interesting. And Shifra told me, it's 5 years. It's 5 years. I'm sure everybody remembers where we were when we heard the news. I was in Moshe Shapiro's Thursday Shir. It was just about to start when I got the call. And, it's no less surrealistic 5 years later than it was then. And, it's always an interesting idea to fathom, as I have said on many occasions to my children who stopped asking me this question. That every now and then I would pass by where you see one of those white signs with the black writing up that come up after people pass away. And there'd be a whole bunch of them. I'd be looking over them. And my kids used to ask me, "Abba, what are you looking for?" I said, "My name." One day it'll be up there. You don't know when, you don't know how, sooner or later. The one thing it teaches you have to live every day. And you have to value and cherish every day. I was once speaking with a guy in Ursameach. I said, "What would you do if you had one day left to live?" And he was like, "Wow, one day left to live? I don't know. I always wanted to this. I always wanted to that." I said, "What would you do?" I said, "Just what I'm doing now." You shouldn't wait to start living your life, And that was one of the amazing things about Yechezkel was he was so incredibly full of life. And, and he was always looking and striving, I remember Shifra told me that last year he decided to go to all of the tefillahs for Shovavim, the special tefillahs people say during the weeks of Shovavim, and so I've made a real effort to avoid going to any of those because just like she told me the last thing he said to her on the phone, she says, "Why do you sound so mellow?" So I don't know, I'm feeling mellow, So I never tell my wife I'm feeling mellow. Whatever I do, there's a couple of things that have made deep impressions on me over the years. In any event, I've had this chance to come out because of the Goldberg family to Beitar for many years. Yechezkel used to bring me out to speak on his father's Yortzeit, etc. And I've been coming out for a long time. And one of the advantages of that is that you get to share a lot of different ideas and thoughts with people. The other advantage of that is that hopefully you've been coming out long enough that you can repeat certain ideas. And, hopefully most people are now moving closer to my age group, where you can hear the same thing day after day. It doesn't make any difference. I've reached an age now where I'm constantly meeting new people, and sometimes they're my immediate family. And I'm just getting back what's coming to me, because everything is me, the connected me. My mother, I'm one of 6 boys, and my mother would, want to say something to me, and she'd go, Jason, Mitchell, Bruce, and I would just stand there, wait. I said, come on, guys, only a few more names left, you'll get to me. That's what I learned from that. No matter what happens, I go, you! So, it's interesting. One of the great disadvantages I have is I never learned how to speak Yiddish. And if you meet people from the last generation, from my generation, I say the last generation, some people here that was 2 or 3 generations ago, but you meet them, they start talking to you in Yiddish, and you go, I'm sorry, I don't speak Yiddish. Jewish? You don't speak Jewish? Are you a Jew? You speak Jewish? So now it doesn't matter. I just go, no matter what they say, I go, yeah. I try to figure out if it sounds bad, I go, there's a schwache Masse. If I think it sounds good, I say, there's a schöne Sache. If I'm not sure, I just go, yeah. My son was living in England, this guy had this whole conversation with me in Yiddish. We get into the car, he goes, I didn't know you speak Yiddish. I said, I don't. There's a schöne Sache. In any event, but it was interesting, my parents had, the reason I don't speak Yiddish is because I went to Chavetz Chaim where they speak in English, and I went to the Orlofsky where they learn in Hebrew, and I never went to any place where they actually learned it in Yiddish, and my parents would only speak Yiddish when they didn't want me to know what was going on. This was my parents' secret language. So we used to listen for different phrases, So I picked up, the code words. So my oldest brother was the Greise. My younger brother was the Kleiner. And then there was 4 others, but I don't know why, but I was the Adara. Everybody wanted to talk about the Adara. I was the Adara, And I didn't know much, but you pick up a little Yiddish, that's helpful. Giving the Kinderlich the Geld is one of those things. And then I would say, the Andere is du. But, why in the world did I bring that up? Even you don't know. Usually my wife, she helps me out. She doesn't know either. I can only blame so much of it on that. The other thing is that evidently I have ADD, which I didn't know about at the time.
You're talking about repeat. You can hear the same thing every day.
So what's it do that? Oh, my mother! Like my mother. Anyway, be that as it may. So there's an idea that I spoke about many years ago here at Beitar, and Shifra told me that it's always been one of her and the family's favorite, ideas, and would I say it over again? And I said, do you think people remember? And she says, no. I don't think so. Because I find this with my children, is that there's 2 advantages I have, and that is, one is that people don't, always remember everything you say, and the other advantage is most people don't listen when you talk in the first place, so it gives you that certain advantage, Especially with me, I found this out already. Somebody was telling me they were in an audience once, and I told a joke, and everybody was laughing, and this guy turns to the person next to me and goes, I don't get it! And the guy goes, neither do I! But they figure I have enough credibility that it must be funny, and if he starts to laugh, So sometimes you say the same idea. So anyway, if you've heard it again, if you've heard this before and you remember it, then you're lucky, because it means you're healthy. But somebody said to me once, and it's really true, that Torah, beautiful shir is like a song. Somebody does it, when Shweki gets up and sings Rachem, nobody says, oh no, not it. Come on. There are people. Let's try another one. When Frank Sinatra gets up and sings My Way, nobody says, boo. Frank Sinatra, the last 40 years of his life, sang the same 4 songs. That's all he knew, you know what I mean? And everybody was impressed, the fact that he was still alive. But, he did it his way. Anyway, but it's really true. Certain ideas, they remain powerful. I heard a story, I don't know if it's true, but there's no reason not to tell it. And Pesach Kron checks out every story to find out if it's true. I never do that. But I heard a story years ago that evidently Chaim Shmulevitz once gave the same shmooze in the mirror like 3 or 4 times in a row. And they asked him why. So he says, because we say in Musa, Anocha Daher. Anocha Daher. Hear it again. Hear it again. It's something that we should hear, not just that we hear it, but we have to be able to incorporate it. So this, like I say, is such a fundamental idea. And it's the topic of suffering, incorrectly referred to, why do bad things happen to good people? Because I find it's not only good people who ask this question. The question is, why do bad things happen to anybody? I don't have to be a particularly good person, and bad things happen to me, and it bothers me just as much as if I was a good person. I don't want bad things to happen. I want everything to be good. And that's why most of the people who complain, why does God do this? They're like me. They're average or below average people. And they still don't want anything bad to happen. So the question is, how do we understand it? How do we understand it? And I'll tell you what I don't want to do. What I don't want to do is deal with philosophy. Philosophy, to me, is never really that compelling. Because if I sit down and give a beautiful, explanation from a philosophical point of view why such and such is happening, but it doesn't speak to me and to my life, then it doesn't do anything for me. At the end of the day, what do I do? You have to be practical. You have to be able to look at a situation and understand it clearly and say, where do I go from here? What do I do with this? Moshe Shapiro, my Rabbi, always says, Chazal tell us, Lilmod Manas Lasais. Whatever you learn, you have to know that you have to do something with it. I remember, he said this over dozens of times that I heard him say, but there was one time, and he said this more than once. Second pasuk in the Torah. The world was nothingness and emptiness, and darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of Hashem hovered over the water. He says, what's the lilmor manas la'asais of this? What do I do with this? How do I take this and turn it into lamaisa? If it just remains in the area of philosophical, speculation, that's not going to help me. I have to be able to take it and make it lamaisa in my life. So, I want to talk lamaisa. How do we deal with suffering? And that's why, to me, the issue is not why do bad things happen. I don't care why. What do I do? So now what do I do? How does one deal when things don't go our way? And all of us, have situations where things don't go our way. It's few and far between will be the people who tell you, I never have any problems. Very often those are the people with the most problems. They just don't even realize it, you know what I mean? So, Baruch Hashem, I know that I am beset with problems, and I know most people that I meet are as well. So let's approach it. And there's a few givens in order to start when we begin asking the question of how do we deal with suffering. The first given is that there is a God. I know to us this is a double pashut, but I'm always amazed that there are people who will tell you they don't believe in God, and they ask, why do bad things happen? Well, because we live in a random universe, that's why. Just a bunch of electrons bumping into each other, and it makes different things happen. So X number of people this year, statistically, will get hit by lightning for no particular reason. Some of them will be davening, and some of them will be eating a ham sandwich, and it's just dumb luck, and there's no explanation to it whatsoever. I can't tell you anybody else that's ever seen this. Have you ever been in a hospital room, and you see these secular people, and they're saying a Tehillim? What's that? Or they'll ask you to daven, or they'll give you, but you don't believe in God, you know what I mean? Yeah, okay. But once something starts to happen, I feel like there's got to be somebody in charge here. There's got to be something operating. Otherwise, why would anything, go on this way? The first thing is the Kodesh Baruch Hu. The second thing is that He is all-powerful. Again, that to us is pretty basic, and yet there is another major religion that uses this as their way out of having to deal with this problem. The Oklahoma City bombing. So there's this minister speaking, and he says, people ask, how could God have done something like this? And the answer is, He didn't. It was Satan. Satan did it. Or Hashem. So God would never do it like this. It's Satan. Most contemporary philosophy today comes from two places. One is the far side, and the other is Calvin and Hobbes. Now, Calvin and Hobbes were both named after philosophers. I don't know if you appreciate that. And if you've never seen the comic strip, I really can't help you. I don't know what you're doing here this evening. In any event, but Calvin, who's this little boy who should be on Ritalin, is talking to Mr. Hobbes who may or may not be real. Because whenever there's anybody else there, he looks like a big stuffed tiger. But when there's nobody else there, he's alive. Sam Waterson once wrote an entire essay saying, whether or not Hab really exists is too difficult a question for us to understand. So I'm not even going to go there. That's already deep philosophy. Anyway, he's talking to Hobbes, and he says, I was in Sunday school, and I asked the teacher, why do bad things happen? And they said, well, it's because of Satan. Satan does bad things. I said, why doesn't God stop Satan? And he says, well, God can't. I said, you mean that Satan is stronger than God? He says, no, Satan is also part of God's plan. I said, you mean God is in cahoots with Satan? And there's a pause, and he says, and I was the first kid excommunicated from Sunday school. I pushed that a little too far. Now, we have no out. We can't blame anything on Satan. Right? The Satan is just that, the accuser. He works for Kodesh Baruch Hu up in the heavenly court. He is the prosecuting attorney. You know what I mean? That's his job. That's why he does. He works for Kodesh Baruch Hu. He's got one of the hardest jobs because he's the busiest guy. He's the Yetzer Hara. He's the Satan. He's the Malach HaMaves. This guy works day and night. One of the busiest malachim that you'll ever meet. You know what I mean? And he's doing what Kodesh Baruch Hu tells him. He doesn't do it. Hey, what do you want from me? This is my job. Hey, make me Gavriel. I'll do that instead. You know what I mean? This is what they gave me to do when I'm doing my job. Get off my back. Right? But you can't blame it. You know, he's doing it. You know, he doesn't a la Milton fall from heaven and better to rule in hell. He does what Kodesh Baruch Hu tells him. When Kodesh Baruch Hu says, go away, like on your Kippur, he says, go away. He says, okay, I'm going away. Don't get upset at me. I'm just doing my job, you know. And that's his job. That's what he has to do. But Kodesh Baruch Hu, if something happens, there's no way to say, well, it's God. The third step is that God is all-knowing. Again, this to us should be a pretty simple thing, but there was a very popular book that came out about 20 years ago by a fellow by the name of Harold Kushner. I don't know if anyone's familiar with the book called? Oh, so people often make this mistake. I hear about you make this mistake. Why do bad things happen to good people? That's not the title. When bad things happen to good people. Because his underlying assumption is we don't know. And he rereads the section from Eov, which is one of the most dramatic moments where after Eov goes through all this suffering and all this philosophizing, he discusses with his friends, finally Kodesh comes to him in a whirlwind and he says, do you question me? He says, do you make did you make the mountains? Did you make the planets? Do you bring in the tides? Do you run the world? Do you do everything like that? The way most people have always learned this is there's something that you're not going to understand because I'm infinite. You're not. And Harold Kushner reads this as basically God whining to Eov. Do you handle this? Do you take care of this? Do you handle everything? I can't be everywhere. I'm limited. And I'm doing the best I can, okay? It's the most never thing you've ever seen. I don't know how anybody can possibly walk away with this belief. Woody Allen once said, I'm sure God, is not evil, he just was being an underachiever. You understand? This is the perception. I don't know. He doesn't know. He doesn't know. He'd like to help. He really would. Somebody once explained to me the difference between the Christian conception of God and the Jewish conception of God is the Christian conception sees God as a kindly old grandfather who would really like to help, but he really can't. It's never. Since we see him as a father. Father sometimes does things that we like, sometimes that we don't like, you know what I mean? But that's his job. So Kodesh Baruch Hu is all-powerful, Kodesh Baruch Hu is all-knowing, and he's good. He's good. It's amazing. When I was younger, and I found that these things don't work anymore, because, very often it's not just a question of technically answering the question, you have to answer the question for the person who's asking it. People used to say to me, I don't believe in God. I said, why? He said, well, because bad things happen. I said, that doesn't prove that there's no God. That just proves you don't like him. I said, it's like a mother tells a child to clean up the room, and the child says, well, I'll tell you what the problem is, Mom, I don't know if you exist. The mother gives him a slap. The child says, now I know you don't exist, because I know your mother, she'd never hit me. I said, the fact that Hashem does something that you don't like doesn't prove his non-existence. It just proves that you don't like him. And if that's the case, I suggest you stay on his good side. But I never found that answer was fulfilling to anybody. So So I don't say those kind of things anymore. So instead, you have to try to deal with it practically. What do we do when something bad happens? Assuming that we are all on board with the first two lines in Mesilas Yesharim, wherein he explains to us that we were created by HaKadosh Baruch Hu and put into this world for one reason. We were created by HaKadosh Baruch Hu to get the ultimate pleasure by being in this world, to get this unbelievable spiritual pleasure of being close to Hashem, and He loves us and wants us this pleasure. If we're on board with that, and I have to tell you that not so many people are, but if we understand that, so then why do bad things happen? And it's interesting that when people are willing to understand HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so then they ask, how could this be? So why are bad things happening? I'm going to give you three approaches. None of them are my own approach. None of them are chidushim. These are all things that are in Chazal, in the Rishonim. These are all things that have been discussed many times. The only difference is I'm going to present it better than you've ever heard it. That's it. It's the only thing that I can do. You understand? This is not a new question. It's not me who has pioneered this. People have been dealing with this issue for millennia. But it's just things that we always know. And I have to tell you how often that makes all the difference in the world. I had a young lady in seminary, and she went off to university, and she happened to be a brilliant young lady. She's studying the sciences, and she calls me up once, and she says, listen, I've been wrestling with this question. I don't understand the age of the universe and dinosaurs, and I don't get it. And don't tell me answer number one, because I don't like that. And don't tell me answer number two, because I don't like that. And don't tell me answer number three. I said, okay, I hear what you're saying. So let's go through it. And I started building it up a little bit and setting it up and, seeing that we have the same assumptions. And as we built through the whole thing, it took me about 15 minutes. At the end, I presented her with an answer, and she was satisfied. I said, now I have a confession to make. It's answer number two. I just presented it to you differently. She said, I said, that's it. I said, you're right. Sometimes we can hear something, and if we hear it the wrong way, we don't appreciate it. A totally irrelevant story, and yet nonetheless fascinating. I was one time at the Yehuda convention. I was actually invited once to the Yehuda convention. This was 4 years ago. But a few years before that, one of my many Hasidim, I'm one of the only non-Hasidic Rebbes, one of my many Hasidim was badgering Rabbi Wolpin to invite me to a Friday morning roundtable discussion on Kiruv Rechokim. Now, the roundtable had already been set. It was already published in the paper. There was no way that they were going to put me on. That did not stop this person from badgering him many times during the day until he finally called me up and said to me, I'd like you to come and be on the roundtable. But we can't print your name, and we can't officially put you on because it's all been set. But you'll be off the roundtable, and you'll come and we'll call upon you to say something. And I said, this is really not necessary. He says, listen, it's important to me that you come because otherwise this person won't leave me alone. So please do me the personal favor. I drove all the way out to New Jersey, and I sat in this little room off of the side of the round table discussion, which was in fact square. I remember thinking about that at the time. But they had a number of people. They all made various presentations that were going on for a very long time. And finally he said to me, do you want to say anything? And I said, no. And then he introduced me. And I said, we've all been talking about here what we have to do for these poor Bali Tshuva, but nobody's explained to me why we need that. Why don't we spend the money on our own children? Why don't we do something else? What's the purpose of it? And I was like, what's he doing? And I said, I'll tell you why. I said, because the frum world is falling apart, and I really hope with the Bali Tshuva, because they actually believe in this stuff. And I came in and I started, anyway, pandemonium. Now, the audience was much more chashuv than the panel, I'm sorry to say. The audience had people like Yonason Rosenblum, and David Schenker, who ran JEP, and Meir Schuster, and people like this. This was the audience, Anyway, they all started saying, I agree with Rabbi Orlofsky. Yes, Rabbi Orlofsky's right. And you see everybody on the panel's like, how did we lose control of the crowd? Anyway, at one point, Jonathan Rosenblum said something that I thought was absolutely fascinating. He said, what happens is that people come in, when they ask a question when they're 3 years old, when they're in second grade, third grade, fourth grade, and they get a third grade, fourth grade answer, and they're content with that for the rest of their lives. But Bali Tshuva come in after a university education, and they don't want a fourth grade answer. They want a deeper answer, so they search to get a deeper understanding and a deeper meaning of it. And Not because the answer may be any different, but the understanding that's underlying it is completely different. And that's why it's so interesting that people, who grew up from, suddenly they ask us a question and we're like, we give over the answer that we got as children and suddenly it doesn't even make sense to us. Because we have to just take it a little deeper. That's what I want to do. Just take ideas that I'm sure we must have all heard beforehand and just maybe present it in a slightly different fashion.
Amen.
The best thing is when it's like a really hot day and the speaker has a cold drink and he's standing up front drinking and everyone else in the audience is going, I'm going to have some more. At any rate, the first question that we have to ask ourselves when something bad happens is it really bad? Is it really bad? Sometimes it's pretty obvious that something is really bad, but if we look at it a little deeper, maybe we'll turn around and we'll say, it's really not really bad. Now, I have to say, by way of introduction, I'm dealing now with suffering, not with death. Death is a whole other topic, and maybe I'll talk about it one time. But I'm dealing now just with suffering, right? Once you're dead, that's it, right? You know what I mean? This discussion no longer applies of what I'm supposed to learn from the experience, right? But people who suffered, there's obviously something I'm supposed to walk away with from this experience. So the first question is it really bad? Okay, fine. A guy gets up in the morning, he goes to work, and he's consistently late. And the boss says to him, this can't go on anymore. And he says, I'm sorry, boss, it won't happen again. He says, it better not, because if you come late one more time, you're fired. Oh, don't worry, boss, it won't happen again. It better not, because otherwise you're fired. I understand. You understand? Yeah, okay. Gets up in the morning, oversleeps. He had that little AM, PM problem, that those of us who won't let go of those American clocks because I just can't know what 22 per hour is. I was never in the military, you know what I mean? Wow, it's 22:50 already. What does that mean? I don't know what it means even, So that's why you find a lot of people at night when they set the, they have to set the time, so they set it for 10:15. Thinking that means 10:15 p.m., but it really means 10:15 a.m., and they really should have set it for 22:15, but they won't, because they don't have that kind of stupid clock, they don't even think that way. Anyway, so it went off, went off at 7 o'clock in the evening. But he eventually wakes up, he looks at the clock, oh my gosh, I can't believe this, I overslept, this is terrible, right? He quickly gets dressed, he runs out to get the bus, right? Now, of course, bus drivers are chosen because they failed the mental exam to get into the army. So that's how you become bus drivers. So the guy is chasing the bus, which is at the bus stop. Rega, rega, rega. Now the bus doesn't pull away, because then you'll give up. He has to wait till you get closer. And then he starts pulling away slowly. Otherwise you won't chase after him. Do you ever see people chasing after an Egged bus? Have you ever seen the Egged bus come back for the guy? Rega, rega. I live in Harnov. It's great because everyone hangs out from the buildings going, rega, rega. And he's running, and the bus makes the turn, and he's still and it's going. And of course, there wasn't just one bus, there were 3 buses, because for security reasons, Egged buses always travel on a pack of 3 at a time. The next bus doesn't come till January next year. Just sit out there and wait, Eventually the bus comes, and you get there and you realize you're really late. You don't know what to do, So you take off your jacket, you undo your tie, you make a coffee, you're walking backwards, you know what I mean? Whatever you can think of to make it look like you're not really late, but the boss has been watching for you since 9 o'clock, and he says, you're late again. I said, I'm sorry, it was such an accident. That's it, you're fired. No, but boys don't understand what. Fired. No, but I have a family. Fired. No, but I need this job. Fired. But fired. Oh gosh, he starts cleaning out his desk. Everyone looks away. Takes the box, little things. Walks outside. Extra, read all about it. The bus you were supposed to have been on blew up. Wow. Now, most people would say, although today it's hard to say because the economic situation is so difficult, but most people would say, given a choice between being blown up and losing your job, they'd rather lose their job. But, it's an unbelievable thing, right? You say, wow, how could that have happened? It's like amazing, yeah? There was a guy who was on a plane, Swiss Air, and I appreciate this because I fly a lot, and I hate flying, which is unfortunate, because I fly a lot. And planes were just simply made for lesser men than I. I don't know who it was made made for, but they were not made for me. I think like midgets or something, thin midgets. So, I always try to get onto the plane quickly, take all the overhead luggage, quickly open up my blanket so no one will notice that I can't button my seatbelt, pretend to be asleep. Take off your shoes, Anyway, this guy's on the plane, and the Swiss Air guy, the person from the office comes in with the security guard, and he says, "Excuse me, sir, there seems to be a problem with your ticket." He says, No, it's right here, thank you very much. He says, "No, sir, evidently it wasn't paid for. It was paid for, thank you very much." And they say, "Please come with us." He says, "Listen, I'm already on the plane, I have my boarding pass, And the security guard helps him to his feet. He slips on his shoes. They start to lead him out. Everybody looks away. Oh, poor guy. They bring him out there, and he's yelling and screaming and protesting. Helft nicht, as they say in Swiss. And they bring up his thing, and it wasn't paid for. He says, I paid for the credit card. Do you have a receipt? No, I don't have a receipt. I don't carry a receipt with me. I went through the travel agent. Who's your travel agent? It's 11 o'clock at night. The place is closed. You know what I mean? Anyway, it takes them 20 minutes, and the Swiss are very efficient. And there's nothing to talk about here. And finally, after 20 minutes, somehow they work out that there was some sort of computer error, and really the ticket had been paid for, and we're very sorry, sir. We apologize. The only problem is the plane already took off. And that is illegal. You're not allowed to take off with people's luggage on it. If you've ever been on one of these El Al flights where they suddenly realize they have a bag that's unaccounted for, and they have to take out all of the luggage, you know what I mean? And find the owner of this one bag and please come out and identify. You can't just take over somebody's luggage, and his overhead luggage, and everything was still on. And he starts screaming and yelling, and they say, please come down, we'll make it up to you, we'll put you on the next flight, we'll give you a better seat, we'll give you some Swiss chocolate, you know what I mean? We'll give you back some of your Holocaust funds, you know what I mean? Just, come on. Anyway, he gets on the next flight, and he's fit to be tired. I can relate to this story. It's a terrible story. And he gets to Israel, and he calls his brother who's in Orsameach, and pandemonium. Because the plane that he was on was the plane that, the Swiss Air flight that blew up. And he was sitting there on the plane, and someone literally took him by the arm and pulled him off. So sometimes you think, wow, this is the world. I'm having such a terrible day. And you don't know what was going to happen if this situation had continued. Right? You look at a situation, and you think you know, and you turn around, you don't. Very strange story in Parshas Kisisa, where Moshe Rabbeinu says that Kodesh Baruch Hu, I want to see you. Now, if I was Hashem, I would have said, come on, Moshe, you can't see me. I'm invisible, But surprisingly, that's not what Hashem responds. He says, well, you can't see my front, you'll see my back. Helpful. So he puts him in a little cave, Hashem passes by, and he sees his back. So that's what we need Rashi for, and Rashi explains that Hashem showed him the knot of his tefillin. Evidently, Kodesh Baruch Hu wears a very large pair of tefillin, and he showed him the knot, What does that mean? So my front, you see my back, you see my knot. What's going on here? Doesn't make any sense. So, of course, the Mepharshim explained that what was it that was troubling him? What was it that he was disturbed about? This question. Why do bad things happen? That's what Moshe wanted to know. Why do bad things happen? And he says, you won't understand as events are unfolding. When they're over, you can look back and see after they're over what happened. And that's why he showed him the knot of the tefillin. I heard once from Moshe Shapiro, because if you see somebody wearing tefillin, you see two straps in the front. But unless you can go to the back and see where the knot is, you don't know where it's coming from. You just see the two straps in the front, but you don't appreciate what's going on until you go to the back. He says, I'll show you the source, I'll show you the root, I'll show you where everything comes from. But as events are unfolding, you're not going to understand it. When it's over, you'll look back and you'll say, now that makes sense. And sometimes we look at a situation and we say, wow, this is terrible. And until it plays out, we don't really know, is this really bad or not? Right? Rabbi Chanan Glassman gives the famous mashal, wherein a guy comes to a farmer and says, I want to learn how to make bread. He says, no problem, come with me, you got some time? He says, yeah. Takes him out to a field, a little pretty meadow. He says, oh, this is beautiful, so idyllic, so bucolic. He says, you like it? Yeah. Hop in the tractor. You destroyed the meadow. Patience. Comes back with another machine, and he makes furrows. Oh, furrows are nice. You like furrows? Yeah, okay. He comes out with a big container of wheat. He says, oh, wheat is nice. You like that? Yeah. Starts throwing it in the mud. You're throwing it in the mud. Patience. Comes by with manure. That looks, yes, that's right. Says, what happens now? He says, we'll come back in a few weeks. Patience. Yeah. Come back in a few weeks, and a big field of grain. He says, oh, I get it. Amber waves of grain. This is very pretty. This is much prettier than metal. You like it? Yeah. Let's go. Cuts it all down. He says, what are you doing? Patience. Nice. Another machine makes it into bundles. Bundles are nice. Oh, you like bundles? Yeah. Puts it on the machine. And you're destroying the bundles. Patience. And out comes much more wheat. He says, oh, I didn't understand. Now I understand. You like wheat. You like the wheat? Yeah. Watch. Puts it in a grinder. Oh, it's gone. You know, like, comes out nice white powder. Oh, white powder. You like it? Yes. It's so pure, it's nice, good. It's water to it. Oh, now it's mud, it's terrible. Patience. And he kneads it all up, and he's finally done, and he forms the bread. He said, oh, now I understand. He said, until this minute, I didn't understand. I understand how you destroyed the furrow in order to plant the wheat, in order to harvest the wheat, in order to winnow the wheat, in order to grind the wheat, in order to make the bread. Now I understand everything. He says, you do? Yeah. And he puts it in the oven. He says, what? After all that, you're going to burn it? Patience. Brings the fresh baked bread. He says, now you understand. But until you hit the last step, you keep thinking you understand. Parenthetically, right? You know, people said to me on more than one occasion, how is Mashiach going to come? How could it possibly work? What's going to happen? How is this going to work? What could possibly go on that? I said, that's the great part about it. You think you understand. As each thing is unfolding, you think, oh, now I know. Come on, you have no idea. All the Jews of Persia were sure we're getting killed. That's it. Esther turned against us. She was the only hope that we had. Mordechai's getting hung tomorrow. There's the gallows. Everything is over. And boom, the next day, everything's all different. You know? And to the point that even the guys who hang, who go to the mikveh have to say, I didn't understand what was going on. Because normally the guys who go to the mikveh know everything. You understand? But here they didn't understand this. They didn't get it, At the end, there'll be things that you don't understand. So I bring an example because everyone can do this. I haven't met anyone in their life who can't do this. Something that we were so sure was terrible. So I came from a traditional family in that, it was interesting. My father probably called, at one point I said to my father, what are we? He says, we're conservative, So, because we went to a conservative synagogue, I said, Dad, but conservative says you have to keep Shabbos too, and you work on Saturday. He says, okay, we'll reform. He was really very easygoing when it came to that. But the truth is, if you want to know, he was really a non-practicing Orthodox Jew. Hashkafically, he was an Orthodox. In England, they don't have a problem. In England, you can have lots of, non-practicing Orthodox Jews. They all belong to Orthodox shuls. They don't really actually keep the laws technically, in the sense of actually keeping them. But my father, hashkafically, was definitely an Orthodox Jew, Anyway, he sends us off to yeshiva. And this was the yeshiva day school. And I really had a lot of trouble following what was going on, because they had a philosophy at the time of Ivrit, where you learn all of the Limud Kodesh in Hebrew, thinking that not only will you learn Chumash and Mishnah and Historia and Dikduk and learn everything, you will also learn Hebrew. But of course, if you never pick up the Hebrew, you learn nothing, and that was the track that I was on. And so by 7th grade, my entire vocabulary consisted of Kain, Lo, Shachachti Babayit, and Yortzeit, let's say. And I found that got me through just about every situation. It was almost as good as my Yiddish. Anyway, so that was, more or less what I was. And I was, at this point, becoming relatively antisocial and, of course, very popular in the class. So, and I was still quite an intellectual. I was doing great in the Limudei Chol. One of the big advantages I had is I actually understood what they were saying. But I had no idea what was going on in the morning, and I was just, becoming more and more of a nuisance over there. Anyway, in 8th grade, I had this Rabbi Well, Tzaddik L'Bracha, and he was a real starker Lakewood, and he was a Talmud of Rav Aaron, and he came specifically in order to be able to upset these very comfortable Long Island conservative children like me. And he was so incredibly in your face that you couldn't avoid him, And I, who already was styling myself something as an intellectual, I wasn't really antisocial for the sake of it. I had a philosophy. So I would argue with him, and he would tear me to shreds. Now, I was no slouch. More than one occasion, I've taught in institutions where they just say, Baruch Hashem, you're on our side. You know what I mean? Because I could do quite well on the other side, Anyway, I started looking up things. I spoke to people. I got arguments, and I'd bring it to him. Boom, boom, boom. He just ripped me to shreds. I was not used to this. And I said to my friends, come on, we got to fight with him. And they said, just ignore him. He's a fanatic. I said, I know he's a fanatic, but what if he's right? They said, ignore him anyway. So I said, I can't do that. What if he's right? I always loved people, they found their way back to Yahidus because they felt this emptiness in their life and they were feeling something, not me, I was very happy. The last thing I wanted to do was become frum. Really. I had no real motivation. Nothing was driving me. I knew that if I became frum, it would basically destroy everything that I had carefully built during my entire life. And now I was confronted with the truth. One of these moments. Truth, capital T, you know? I'm like, uh-oh, what do I do? Right? So I decided, okay, I have no choice. I have to become frum. And I slowly started to, you know, make the changes. And by the time I was bar mitzvah, I was more or less Shomer Shabbos. But, like many people become frum in situations that are not, you know, positive and supportive, you become sort of a Morano, and you light candles in the basement, you know what I mean? And you daven mincha in a phone booth, you know what I mean? And, you know, and you daven in a bench like this, you know what I mean? And, you know, you want to try to, you know, wear a lot of caps and stuff, you know. You do the best you can to cover up the fact that you obviously have made a massive life change, you know. You want to go out Friday night? Oh, I have something. What is it? Maybe we'll come. No, you wouldn't like it. Not for you. Yeah. No, thanks. It's good talking to you. You know? And you have to like cover it up. Now, at this point, I was one of the most popular kids in the class. Luckily, they didn't know I'd become frum, but because that would have been the death of me. So, you know, I was running that year. I was going to become GO president, and I was a shoo-in to win. There was no question about it. I was, you know, there. My brother was already vice president. You know, they called the student organization there the GO. Right? The general organization, GO. It's like DO for GO. I mean, it doesn't get better than that, you know what I mean? And I was all set. It was a shoo-in, you know? Anyway, the Sunday in May, towards the end of May, when they were going to have the week of elections, I was playing running bases with my brothers. And as I pointed out, I have 6 brothers, and I'm the quietest. So it's a somewhat lively home that I grew up in. And anyway, we were playing running bases, and I slipped on the grass, and I fell on my ankle, and I felt it go crack. It was one of the most painful experiences of my life, and I lay there with the tears coming down my face. I was in such intense pain. And my oldest brother, Jason, sees this and says, "Get up." So I said, "I can't, you know, I think I broke my ankle." He says, "You're faking, get up." I said, "I'm not, I can't move." Okay, it could be serious. So what they did is they kept playing, but now you had to jump over me. That was which everybody was happy when everybody was able to clear me, but you know. Now I have to give a little background to this because my family is a little, what can I say? We're a little over dramatic. You know what I mean? You know, nobody is ever sick. We're always dying. Nobody ever has a headache. It's a brain tumor. You know what I mean? Like that's how it is. All Orlofskys are this way. We are very overly dramatic, and that's how it goes. It just comes with the territory. So he, you know, nobody ever just falls and hurts themselves. They have to break their ankle, of course. But in this particular case, I did. So anyway, then my brother Gary comes home, and everyone's like sort of talking and stuff. And you know, he sort of notices that I'm left alone, lying in a crumbled heap on the grass. So he says, "What's wrong with David?" He says, "Oh, he says he broke his leg, but he's just faking." He says, "It might be real. Let's help him in." So Jason and Gary helped me, and my brother Mitchell played taps. Brings me in, puts me on my bed. Now my mother, who's used to, you know, very dramatic, comes in and says, "What's wrong with you?" I said, I broke my ankle. She says, "Why didn't you empty the dishwasher first?" I said, "I wasn't planning on breaking my ankle." She said, "Oh, your father will be home from work soon, we'll go to the hospital," you know. Okay, nothing I could do. I was in terrible pain. My brother Jason sits down next to me in the bed, and he says, "Look, there was one time I went to get a gym class, and I pretended my arm was broken, and Dad took me to the hospital, paid for x-rays. When he found out I was faking, he beat the daylights out of me. So you better make sure it's broken." So I'm like, oh my gosh, I didn't go to the hospital, you know what I mean? All right, father comes and he says, "Come on, we'll go to the hospital." I said, No, it's okay, I'm fine. You know? He said, "No, we need x-rays." "No x-rays, I'm fine." You know? Lie me on the back seat, takes me to the hospital. Now this is a Sunday in May. Now, in the New York area, of course, it's usually cold. It's hard to go out. At the end of May, suddenly it's warm. On Sunday, everybody goes out and plays. And on Sunday night, they all go to the hospital. You know what I mean? Because everybody hurts themselves playing. And the place is packed. You know? You can't even find anything. Finally, my father finds someone to come out with a wheelchair, which doesn't have a leg rest. I didn't appreciate the significance of that until it wheeled me and my foot was on the floor. And I managed to pull it up. Terrible. So I'm sitting there in this sweltering out. There was no air conditioning in the place, you know. And I'm sitting in this sweltering heat, and everybody around me is covered in blood. You know, it's like a horrible scene. Finally, a guy comes out and he starts feeling my ankle. "Hurt you here? No. Here? No. Here? Yes. Here? Yes." And once they find that spot, they don't let go. "Here? Here? Hey, Bob, push him over here. Here? Hey, try to anyone see something here?" "Okay, they wheel me up for x-rays. You're number 74. Not a problem." You know, they wheel me in. Finally, they bring me into this room. It looks like Frankenstein's laboratory, you know what I mean? They put me on this little table. The guy is a quarter mile away in a lead-lined booth and says, "There's nothing to worry about." I said, "Then why are you over there? Why am I out here?" You know? No problem. They take the pictures. It's now about 2 o'clock in the morning. He brings it out. The guy looks at it and he says, "Wow, your ankle is broken." I said, "Baruch Hashem." I said, "What are you, crazy?" I said, "No, I did." Now, the guy was very excited that my ankle was broken because he had never gotten to do a cast before. He was an intern. This was his first cast. And even though my ankle was broken, for some reason, which I've never been able to understand, he put a full leg cast on my toe with no bend in it. So I couldn't even sit down. I couldn't get into the car. I had to lie across the back seat. He gives me a pair of crutches. Now, this was the first time I ever had crutches. I didn't know that sometimes the little rubber tip at the end gets worn out. That becomes significant later. In any event, I come in, I don't know, I can't get on the school bus. I can't get. So suddenly the other kid who's running for president realizes this is my chance. I'm running against the guy who's not here. You know, it becomes the dirtiest campaign. People are putting up signs, ripping down signs, people are buying votes, you know what I mean? It's like this whole thing. And my brother says, "Look, you gotta get in, you know." I said, "I'm gonna come in on Friday, you know, and I'll make my big speech, you know. I'll wait to the end, you know." In between, they took me to an orthopedist. He was certainly, you know, amazed to see this particular cast. He cut it down to run this under the knee, you know, cut my trousers, you know, and I was all set, and I had my notes ready. He's going to come in on my crutches. I've suffered for my people, you know what I mean? I was all set. That Friday morning, the little rubber tip rubbed out. And the reason they put the rubber tip is because when you put a wooden crutch on a wooden floor without the rubber tip, it has a tendency to slip out from underneath you when you fall to the ground. So instead of going to school to make my dramatic speech, I went back to the orthopedist and I lost the election. And I came back that next Monday, and 8th grade boys are on the evolutionary scale just below hydras. And of course, they all abandoned me. That was it. I was a loser. I lost. They all switched sides. They went up to the other kid. I had no friends left. My life was over. If someone was to come to me at that moment with a button and said, "Push this button and you will pop out of existence," there's no question I would. I went from being the top of the class to being nothing. Nothing. A pariah. Totally shunned by everybody with the exception of these 2 kids who were also shunned because they were the only 2 frum kids in the class. And so they came over to befriend me because there was nobody else left, and then I revealed the fact that I was a hidden Jew. And we were machazik each other, and that got me through high school. And because of that, I was able to become a frum person for the rest of my life. So if I look back, I see there's no question. If I had lost that election, if I had won that election, I don't know that I would have had the courage to stand up to everybody for years and still remain frum, you know? Because I lost that election, it took me out of that whole chevra. It gave me the frum friends. It allowed me to become the person I wanted to become. At the time, it was the worst thing that ever happened to me. But with perspective, you suddenly realize this is the best thing that ever happened. So, the first question when something bad happens, and it's hard, you have to be creative sometimes and say, is this a good thing or a bad thing? Sometimes things that happen that look bad are really good. Step number 1. Step number 2, I can't figure out, because it's not a question of something bad happened to me. I'm suffering, I'm in pain, I'm sick, I'm having difficulty, whatever it is. A woman once said to me, "I feel like HaKadosh Baruch Hu sets me up for test after test, pushes me and pushes me, waits for me to fall, and then laughs at me." What a depressing picture. Here's this poor little woman, you see this big hand pushing her until she falls, and then you hear, "Ha, ha, ha, ha." Now I can tell her that's not true, but that doesn't help because all you're doing is invalidating her feelings. For the benefit of men, women have feelings, but they can become invalid. I didn't know this. For years I only taught boys, and the way you validate boys' feelings are by hitting them. You know what I mean? Now they're validated. You know what I mean? I don't want to look at it. Oh, yeah. And I'm like, okay. You know what I mean? The girls have actual feelings, all kinds of different ones. It's like so strange. And I was teaching in a seminary once. I was just filling in, you know, and I asked a question, and a girl raised her hand, and I said, "That's wrong." And she said, "How can you say that to me? Don't you know I'm in therapy?" I was like, "Oh, gee, I'm sorry." You know? "Well, you just invalidated me." I said, "Well, what are you, a parking meter? I'll put another one." But she went crazy. That was it. You know, and she didn't even leave. She sat there mumbling under her breath. And So now it doesn't matter what a girl says in class, no matter what she says, I say, that's an interesting point. But let's say that God did not send down his only son to die for our sins. Maybe we can look at this a different way, you know what I mean? But I never say wrong, no matter what it is, never wrong. So that's an interesting point. Let me look at it from a different point of view, though. So it doesn't help to invalidate people's feelings. This is how I feel. You can tell me it's illegitimate, but that's how I feel, you know? So she says, I feel like Kodesh Baruch Hu sets me up for test after test, and and waits for me to fall and laughs at me. So I said, listen, I'll tell you the truth. I have a whole bunch of kids. Baruch Hashem, they all know how to walk. You know how they learn how to walk? Those of us who have little children learn how to walk. First they start to crawl. Then they start to creep around on the furniture. And then eventually they wait for Abba to take them with their hentelach and walk with them. And this is it. You're now in heaven. This is as good as it gets. I get my own personal walker. And at some point, Abba lets go and backs up. And the kid freezes. Come on, walk to Abba. And the kid thinks, okay, what's the deal? He knows I can't walk. He says, no, you can do it. I trust these people with everything. And they take one step, they take two steps, and they fall. What do the parents do? Yay! And the kid says, these people are sick. First they set me up for a fall, and then when I fall, they laugh and cheer. You know what I mean? And of course we're not laughing and cheering because the kid fell, we're laughing and cheering because they took 2 steps. And next time they took 5 steps, and then 10 steps, and then they learn how to walk, and how to run, and how to play, and how to dance. If a parent wants to make sure a kid never falls, then you have to make sure that they never take any chances. And when the kid's 35 and you're going to carry him into his office, it's going to be a little embarrassing, Hi, Mom, could you put me at my desk, I want to get a coffee. Just put me on the floor, I'll crawl over to the coffee. No, you want to learn how to walk, you got to be prepared to fall. Sometimes we're experiencing pain, but that pain are growth pains that we're experiencing. I once had a kid, I was sure the doctor was pulling my leg. The kid was in pain, and I bring him, he checks him out, and he says, it's growth pains. I said, what does that mean? He's growing. Oh, come on. You don't really have growth pains. Yeah, you really do. Your body is stretching and growing, and it hurts. Growing up is painful. There's no question about it. Becoming somebody special is painful. So I was running NCSY in Long Island, and I had this girl who was as close to a tzaddikus as I've ever had in all of my years that I was teaching, whether I was working at NCSY certainly. This is a girl whose mother decided at some point she didn't want to be frum anymore, and she ran away to join a commune or something like that. Her father, who was an extremely difficult person, said, well, your mother left, now you're the mother of the family. So you'll be responsible for all the housework. And I expect supper and, and cleaning and all that like this, right? And which was kind of depressing, but this kid never got down. This kid was always a very positive kid, and she had a dream. Her dream was that she was going to go away to a particularly good seminary in Yechezkel. This was many years ago. And there weren't many seminaries to choose from, right? Now there's a whole bunch, you know what I mean? But back then there were very few seminaries, and this was a very high-level seminary, and like many seminaries, it doesn't give out any scholarships, right? So she's going to have to pay full tuition, and there's no money in the house, right? Very little money, the father didn't make a lot of money, and you need top grades, and you have to pay for airfare and all your living expenses, you know what I mean? And pay the tuition, and, so she decided, I'm going to do it. And starting in 9th grade, she set up a regimen for herself, where she took care of the house, and she did the cooking and the cleaning and the laundry, and she worked on her schoolwork and got top grades, and whenever she could, on weeknights and on weekends, she worked as a waitress for a caterer, and she squirreled away all of her money. She had no social life, she never spent any time with friends. All she did was save up her money and do schoolwork and take care of the house, and that was it, and she always had a smile on her face. 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, finally it's 12th grade. She's got the A average, she's got the money saved up, everything's great. She goes for her interview, she's turned down. And she was devastated. She calls me up, and I said, this can't be. I know the head of the seminary, I'll call him up. I called him up, and he said, oh, how you doing? Do you have any good girls for me? I said, I got the best. He says, tell me. I tell him the name. He says, what? It's the worst girl I ever interviewed. I said, it can't be. This girl's a tzaddikus. She's unbelievable. I says, listen, I'll do the following for you. I'll allow her to have another interview. Right? I'm not going to accept it on your say-so, but I'll give her another interview. I'm leaving tonight, so Rabbi so-and-so can interview her. I knew Rabbi so-and-so. I called him up. I said, is it okay if I come along? Sure. I come along. This girl was the worst interviewee that I had ever heard in my life, but really terrible. I remember the first question. I blanked out after that because it was just too painful, The first question was the standard question. Why do you want to come to my seminary? Every girl knows the answer to that question. I'm looking for a place where I can grow. That's the correct answer. She said, it's next to my grandmother's house. Bad answer. Bad answer. It was downhill from there, and I'm just going, oh, no. Anyway, he finishes, thank you very much. He looks at me and says, what is this, a put on? I said, okay, she doesn't interview well. He says, well, she doesn't interview at all. I don't care. I'm calling in all my chicks. Take this girl on my say-so. He says, you know what? I know you're a reliable guy. I'll do it for you as a favor. So that's all I'm asking. Fine. Called her up that night. I said, congratulations, you're in. She says, because of you, right? I said, well, of course, my recommendation carried weight. She said, no, I mean, if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't have gotten in, right? Rabbis hate direct questions. I began to tell her the relevant story about a king, and one of the things they teach us in rabbi school. Anyway, she burst into tears, and she says, I only had one dream. Why did this happen to me? And I said, because you want to help people, and one day you'll be able to help people because of this. It was kind of lame, but it was the best I could come up with on the spot. And that's it. And she went off to the seminary, she was a big star, and then she went off to, I think, social work or whatever she was doing, and she was working someplace, and she was, very successful, and I lost complete track of her. Most of my stories are Lidfisher stories. They have no endings. They're very often, I'll tell a story and someone will say, what happened? I don't know, never saw them again. You know what I mean? Chassidish stories have endings. My stories almost never have any endings. This is a shtickle Chassidish. So years later, I get a phone call and she says, it's true, it happened just like you said. Just like you said it happened. I said, who is this? I thought I was the only person who used to do this. I used to just call people and start talking, and they're like, excuse me, who is this? Oh, you don't know who I am? Introduce myself, So now I always know it. I always call up and say, Shalom, this is Dovid Orlofsky. It could be my wife, doesn't matter. This is Dovid Orlofsky. So just make sure everyone knows who I am beforehand. I call my mother, Shalom, this is Dovid. She says, who? I said, it's the Andra. Anyway. She says, this is so-and-so. I was like, oh my gosh, I haven't heard from you in years. What are you talking about? She says, you remember when I didn't get into seminary? And I said, sure. Sure. So she says, do you remember you said to me, this is because one day I'm going to be able to use this to help people? And I said, okay. I could have said that, So she says, well, there was somebody who came in today and nobody could help this girl. This girl was hysterical and nobody could calm her down. And then finally they sent it to me. And I said, let me help you. And she says, you don't understand. Nobody understands. And I said, let me help you. And she says, do you know what it's like, to have a dream and never have it fulfilled? And I said to her, yes, I do. And she stopped and she says, I believe that you do. And I was able to help this girl. And, it's so amazing. We go through experiences in life that we may not choose and we wouldn't want. But those experiences make us the people that we are today. And it could be that if we would rewrite our lives, we would rewrite our lives and there wouldn't be any contrast. There wouldn't be any hills and valleys. Everything would be flat. There wouldn't be any harmony to the music. Everything would be the same. But you can only go so far on a path like this until you become so incredibly bland, until you become a person who has none of the character that makes us the people that we are. Very often, HaKadosh Baruch Hu sends us experiences for us to be able to become the people we're supposed to become. Be nice to the Ger because you were Gerim. Be nice to the Eved because you were an Eved. You were in Mitzrayim. You know what it was to suffer. You went through a very serious sensitivity training course so that you would be sensitive to other people. Right? So sometimes something happens and we don't see how it's really something good, but maybe it's a process. All right. Let's say I look at the situation. I don't see any way it's good, and I don't see any way it's a growth experience. It's just bad. All right. I've asked this question over the years to different audiences around the world, and I said, how bad does something have to be for us to question HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the master of the universe, the creator of the world? How big does it have to be? And people say a death in the family, a serious illness, a serious car crash, a fire, something really bad. I said, that's too bad. Because the Gemara says differently. You know how bad something has to be for you to question HaKadosh Baruch Hu? If you stub your finger. Which makes sense, because if HaKadosh Baruch Hu is all-powerful, he can make sure that you don't stub your fingers. You've been in situations where you almost fell. You did one of those cartoon character, you know what I mean, and it caught you balance. You don't have to always fall. Things don't have to go bad, right? So Kadosh Baruch Hu stopped you from stubbing your finger. Every time something happens, pashpesh b'masav, take a look and see why this is going on. Ask ourselves why, right? There's these magnets that I used to see on people's refrigerators. I don't know if they're still around. These are the magnets. One said, don't sweat the small stuff. The other one says, it's all small stuff. So we say to Kadosh Baruch Hu, the only thing that would make me question you is death in the family, serious illness, a major car crash. And Kadosh Baruch Hu says, that's too bad because I'm trying to get your attention. And you're nothing personal, but you don't have to be on the level of prophecy. So I can't appear to you in a bush. So I'm going to have to send you a message. And no matter what I do, you say, that's nothing. That's nothing. You want to get my attention, Kadosh Baruch Hu, you better blow up something. Okay then. You don't give me a lot of maneuverability here, you know what I mean? But if that's what you're going to do, it's the only way to get your attention. If you sweat the small stuff, you don't have to sweat the big stuff. If something happens and you say, wait a second, why is this happening? Let me look and try to figure this out. Sometimes the tap on the shoulder is enough. If the tap on the shoulder doesn't work, then we shake you. If that doesn't work, we slap you a couple of times. If that doesn't work, we take 2 electrodes and put on your chest. But we're going to get your attention one way or another. If we don't think that there's enough life left in you, we're going to try to put it through. I heard a story years ago with Mrs. Alman Meltzer that he was talking to a bacha, and suddenly his wife gave a scream from the kitchen. He runs in, and hurried conversation. They grab their coats, they run out. Come back about a half hour later. He says, Rabbi, what was that about? He says, nothing. So what do you mean nothing? You left me for half an hour. My wife was heating up milk and it boiled over. And she knows it never happens to her. There must be a reason. We started discussing, we realized that Tanuva milkman, he used to have milkman, Tanuva milkman delivered the milk and she didn't have the money. I had the money. So she couldn't pay him. So we ran down to Tanuva, we found out where he lived, we gave him the money, and he says, thank you so much because this is the money I need to be able to buy bread for my family. When I heard that story the first time, I thought to myself, what do we say in English? No sense crying over spilled milk. Hey, things happen. So it's like Baruch is trying to get your attention. So the milk boils over. Nope, not a big deal. Right? Okay, so the oven breaks. I never liked that oven. I get a new one. Kitchen burns down. Yay, we get to remodel. You know what I mean? The house blows up. What do I have to do to a person who says, gee, do you think there's a message here? Now, what is the message? I can't tell you. I am not a Navi. I do not have the gift of Nevuah. I wish I could be able to tell you why. But there's a general principle, and that is that things work mida connected mida. And we have to try to work. I have a friend of mine who tells the following story. A guy is speaking Lashon Hara. He's about to speak Lashon Hara. So, I want to tell you about Bob. You can't believe what just happened. Suddenly somebody opens the door, and the door hits him in the mouth, and he splits his lip. And, puts ice on it, and he says, why did this happen? Why did this happen? And he thinks, and he says, it's obvious. I don't do enough stucco work. And he starts a stucco organization, and he runs around, and he raises money, and he helps people, and by the time that he dies, he's raised millions of dollars and changed people's lives. Okay? Now, he gets up to Shemayim. They pull out the folder, and they say to him, you know why you got hit in the mouth with the door? And the answer is, I have no idea. I don't know. It would be nice if we could make this association, but we always can't. We read Megillah Esther, and it's all put together very nicely. They go to the party, and then they get this terrible decree against them. Right? But that was 9 years apart. They had to go and send a bird to bring a message to Rishon Bar Yochai in hiding to find that answer. They couldn't understand why. They didn't make that immediate association. Hey, how come they were all destined to be killed? There was something there they didn't get. They didn't put 2 and 2 together. I can't tell you what the immediate cause and effect is. Very often we think it is, but the process of examining something is the process. Pashpesh b'maasav, look at what you're doing and come to the question. B'chol ma'aseh asher yaseh, says the Mesilas Yesharim at the beginning of Perek Gimel. Every action that you do, first weigh it to decide. I have to sit down and make a decision. But when something happens and I have to look at this and try to figure out why, I'm not a Navi, I may not get the right insight. In general, you have to try to work it out. Now, between me and you, I don't know any more than anybody else, but I would have immediately made the assumption that it has to do with the D board, and that's why I got hit in the lip. But there's no way to know for sure, right? But nonetheless, we tried to help. I told this story over years ago. And a young lady comes over to me and says, okay, help me work this through. Right? 3 times I fell and broke my right arm. All 3 times I was roller skating at 2 times was my birthday party, 1 time was my cousin's birthday party, and each time at this birthday party, which is the rolling skating party, I fell and I broke my right arm. So I said, this is a relatively easy one. You're a klutz, and you shouldn't roller skate. I heard a story, Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, the kid was on the 3rd floor, and he fell out the window. And Baruch Hashem, he landed on bushes, and he wasn't seriously hurt. And he goes right to Shlomo Zalman, he says, what is the Kodesh Baruch Hu trying to tell me? He says, he wants you to put up Sarah Gib. Sometimes the answer is really very simple, you know? So I said, okay, you're a klutz. She says, well, here's the problem with that. I'm a semi-professional skater. I've been skating since I was 3. And in all the years that I'm skating, and I perform on skates, I dance on skates, I jump, I do leaps on skates, I skate backwards, I skate with partners, I jump in the air. I've never fallen in all the years except those 3 times. And each time I fell at my birthday party and broke my right arm. Wow, that's scary. So I said, look, I'm not a Navi, I can't tell you for sure. All I can do is work it through the way that I would. She said, that's all I'm asking for. I said, are you a person who enjoys giving more or taking? Right? Now most people will lie when you ask them this question, because most people like to take, but a lot of people would much rather give. And she says, I'm a much more of a giving person. I always feel uncomfortable when I'm taking, I like to help people out much more than I have to depend on people. I don't like to take. I said, well, here's your birthday. Such an important day in your life. And you make it a day of taking. It's my party. It's my gifts. It's my cake. And you, through, in my opinion, rather poor planning, decided to make it a skating party so everyone can also look at you and say, look at my skating, look at me, me. The right arm in Judaism represents the Midas HaChesed. It's the ability to go over and give. And here, on this very important occasion, you took a day of giving and turned it into a day of taking. You broke your Midas HaChesed. I said, I would suggest, on your next birthday, first of all, don't make it a skating party. I said, second of all, instead of bringing gifts, send in the invitations. In lieu of a gift, please give a check to the following tzedakah, and you could have somebody from the tzedakah there to come and collect the checks, and saying that I'm going to use this as an opportunity to take this day and make it into a day of giving. Well, she thought this was a great idea. She's like, that makes so much sense to me. Of course, yeah. And I already know which tzedakah, I'm going to do this. I said, whoa, slow down. I'm not a party planner, okay? You know what I mean? I'm just offering a suggestion because it makes so much sense. I said, was it worth breaking your arm 3 times for this insight? She says, for sure. Wow. Now, the problem with telling this story is that I was telling this story over once in a share, and someone came up to me and said, okay, Orlofsky, explain me this. Now, by the way, this is where the story ends, because I'm really not so good at this, okay? Like most people, I only tell you my successes, which unfortunately is only 2. So, this guy comes up to me and says, okay, Rabbi Orlofsky, explain me this. Right? My father is a very athletic man. His whole life is sports. He loves to play sports. It doesn't matter on the sport. Football, hockey, baseball, skiing, whatever it is. He's very athletic, and he loves sports. And he's gotten this degenerative, this disease where your muscles start to disintegrate, and degenerative disease, and he's slowly losing control of his body. I moved in with him to try to help him out, and I can't tell you how terrible it is. He doesn't want me to try to help him because he's a very proud man, but I hear him get up at night to go to the bathroom, suddenly he falls to the floor, and I'm lying in bed and I cringe, and I know I can't go out and help him, and slowly, painfully, he pulls himself back to his feet. His whole life was his sports. This is what he lived for. Why is this happening to him? I have no idea. I'm not Navi. So I said, well, how's your mother handling this? So my mother's not really involved. I said, why? She says, because they got divorced many years ago. I said, why? She says, because she felt like he had no interest in a relationship. All he cared about was sports. I said, does he have anybody else in his life besides you? So I said, well, since he started to get sick, he joined a support group for people with this disease, and he met a nice Jewish woman in this group. It was interesting. Just before I left for Israel, he said to me, this is the first time in my life I know what it's like to be in love. So I said, what's more important, to play sports or to be in love? If HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't take this away from him, he would just keep playing sports, but he would never know what it's like to be in love. And he thought about that and said, okay, but what about me? Why do I have to go through this? Quick on the update. I said, well, I have to tell you the truth. You seem a lot more mature than the other people here in this program. He says, no, I don't know what it is. People my own age, they're such babies. They think everything's a big joke. They take life like it's not seriously at all. I said, well, I guess you're going to handle life differently. He says, yeah, when I get married, I know what it's really all about. I'm going to take my relationship up. I said, so because of this, you're going to have a much more meaningful life, right? So someone called me up once, and they said, I heard you say these two stories on the tape. Can you explain this to me? All the glasses in our house are breaking. I said, you mean like people are klutzy and they're knocking it over? He says, sometimes. And sometimes they just, in the shelf they break. Sometimes in the dishwasher they break. And they say, look, my wife is just pouring milk into a glass and it just broke. I said, you need an exorcist. I don't think this is not my field anymore. I don't deal with evil spirits and stuff, you know what I mean? Little Kabbalist. But very often things happen in our lives that if we stop to think about it, and I have to tell you, when you start looking, when you start looking in your life and you see things happen, sometimes the association is so clear that you just have to smile and say, okay, Kadosh Baruch Hu, I get the message. You know what I mean? It's almost too obvious to miss. If you're looking for it. They tell the famous story. It's a famous story. And whenever anybody says that, they're going to tell it anyway. So I don't even know why they bother saying it. Yeah, it's a famous story. Except for the fact that it's encouraging everyone to tune out. But it's a famous story. This person's driving and they're late for a doctor's appointment and it's in Manhattan. There's no spots around any place. They're like, Kadosh Baruch Hu, I don't know what I'm going to do. I need your help. How am I going to park? I have to get to this doctor's appointment. I'm sick. If I miss this, I don't know what I'm going to do. But you got to help me. I need a parking spot. And suddenly, right in front of the office, a car pulls out. And the guy says, oh, it's okay, Kadosh Baruch Hu, I found a place. I don't need you. Sometimes things happen and we just ignore it. We say, well, that's nothing, or that was a coincidence, or that was this. But if something happens, we ask ourselves, now, this is the danger. It could be wrong. It could be wrong. I don't know. I can't tell you for sure. The best we can do is talk it through and try to find out and understand and find understanding for ourselves. But I think that if we use one of these methods, number one, we ask ourselves, is this really bad? Maybe it's really good. Maybe there's something good here and I just don't get it. Maybe this is a growth experience. Maybe I'm growing through this so that I'll be a more effective person. I have a more meaningful life, though I don't see it right now. And maybe HaKadosh Baruch Hu is trying to send me a message. Because he's not ready to give up on me yet. And if I've got something wrong in my life, maybe he wants me to turn it around. I want to finish just with this idea. Sarah hears about it and dies just from the news. So she's greater than Abraham. He gives three different approaches, but the third approach to me made a deep impression. The answer is because it wasn't her Nisayon. And you only get Nisayon if you can pass it. But sometimes another person's pain is so powerful that we could die just from hearing about it. That to me is such an incredible... I had a person call me up, Erev Yom Kippur. He says, do you have any time for me today? I said, listen, Erev Yom Kippur is a very short day. I don't have any time. Maybe we can talk on the phone. What's the story? So I'm out of faith. I said, Erev Yom Kippur is a bad time to be out of faith. Pick a different day. I said, what's the problem? And he tells me a story. I won't go through the whole story, but it was just one terrible thing after another. You know, his father died before he was born. His mother was put into an insane asylum because she tried to kill him as a baby. She was insane. He went to live with his elderly grandparents and help take care of his severely retarded aunt. You know, change her linens and her, diapers and everything, and help him out in the store because they had no money. While he was in the store, his grandfather got shot in front of him. He had to clean up the blood, and he himself has his own physical handicaps, and it's just like one thing after another. Somehow in the midst of this, he became firm. He came up to Yisrael to learn. He found a young lady to marry him, with his disabilities and everything. And it was such a big simcha. He says, and now we're married X number of years. And the doctors have just told us we can't have any children. I'm out of faith. I said, listen, I'll call you back. I really have to think about this, So my wife says, what's the matter, So I told her the story. She says, well, what are you going to tell him? I said, I already know what I'm going to tell him. I just have to get the strength to say it. And I called him back and I said, listen, I have no right to tell you what I'm going to tell you, but I'm going to tell it to you because it's true. And I think that you know it, but I have no choice. I have to tell you this is the truth. It says that Yitzchak and Rivka didn't have children for 10 years because the Kodesh Baruch Hu loves the tefillas and tzaddik. I said, the Kodesh Baruch Hu pushes each one of us to be able to reach our personal growth and our particular greatness. Baruch Hashem, I have a very low level. So he doesn't push me too much. And therefore, all it takes is for me to go to the refrigerator and see there's no ketchup, and that is the suffering that I can tolerate. The only thing, sometimes it's worse than that. There's only like a little ketchup left, and you're shaking. And then you're like spritzing and it gets in your shirt. And that's about all I can tolerate. But obviously, Chris Baruch is incredibly impressed with you. So he puts you through a lot. And he puts you through such tremendous things. And because of that, you reach personal greatness. That's what I said to him. And he said to me, I already knew this, I just had to hear it from somebody. And I've been impressed with this over the years, more and more times. I told this story over once in Toronto, and a woman came up to me and said, you think so? And she tells me a tale of woe that was just so horrible. Just terrible, terrible things. And I didn't know what to say. And I just said to her, wow, this is so terrible. I feel so bad for you. And she says, no, it's not so bad. I said, no, listen, what you've been through that. And she says, no, really, it's all right, I can handle it. And the more I'm just sympathizing with her, empathizing with her, the more she's reassuring me that really, I'm okay, don't worry, don't get upset, you know what I mean? But she came over to tell me that I was wrong. And yet, as soon as I was able to feel her pain and understand her pain, sometimes people just want you to be able to understand it. You can't help all the time. Sometimes there's nothing you can do. I had a young lady who wanted to come back for a second year in Israel, and her mother said, absolutely not. There was nothing to talk about, you know what I mean? And finally, she saw the daughter was very upset, and she said, you should talk to one of your rabbis, and they should explain to you that you're not coming back, and that you should deal with it. So she says, well, maybe you could explain it to one of my rabbis. You want to talk to Rabbi Orlofsky? It's fine. So she said, you've got to convince my mother that I should come back. I said, I don't know what I can do, but I'll do the best I can. And I talked to the mother, and the mother was, it's so hard for me to see my daughter this upset. And I said, listen, we're parents. What can you do? Sometimes you have to do the best thing that there is for your child. And she starts crying. She says, but she's so unhappy. She says, I understand that. But if you really think it's the wrong thing to do, what can you do? She's going to be disappointed. Sometimes parents have to do what they think is best for their children. Because, but look at her, she's so upset, she's so unhappy. I said, I know, but what can, you have to do what you think is right. Anyway, this was a phone call. When I got off, my wife said, what did you do? I said, because first I want her to feel that she's being understood. First we have to be understood. Then we can try to move onwards. Daughter comes over me the next day and says, you were great. My mother said I can come back. It's like, well, yeah. Of course. I did nothing. All I did was listen. All I did was understand. And sometimes that's all we can do. People are going to have whatever they're going to have to handle in this world. And that's it. And Kodesh Baruch Hu, unless you really, really, really become really, really, really bad, he's not going to give up on you. And he's going to chase you, and he's going to push you to your own personal greatness, whether you want it or not. He will not sit back and allow you to live lives that are mediocre. He will not sit back and allow you to waste your life or your children's life. He's going to push you to be able to attain greatness. And you want to run away? So he's got a big fish waiting to swallow you up, which is always more unpleasant than going to Nineveh. This is the one thing I walked away with from Sefer Yonah. You have a choice between going to Nineveh and getting swallowed by a big fish. Go to Nineveh. You understand? HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to make sure that you do what you have to do in this world, and after the fish spits him out, Hashem says, okay, let's try again. Want to go to Nineveh? Going. Going. And from that point onwards, the best that I know, they've not really brought down. I don't think Yonah ever had fish. You want to have a fish? I'll take the chicken. But you know, the front people are having fish. I don't care. I had enough fish already. You don't like the taste? No, it doesn't like the taste of me. You know? But, you want to be left alone. You don't want to be left alone. If a HaKadosh Baruch Hu really gives up on you, then nothing bad will happen. And you'll go around and say, gee, nothing ever goes wrong in my life. And then you really have to worry. But as long as bad things are happening, it's either because it's not really bad, or it's because it's personal growth, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to help you achieve greatness, or it's there because, there's something in our life we need to correct, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to tap us on the shoulder, and if that doesn't work, he's going to shake us up, because he's going to want to see us be able to, at the end of our lives, turn around and say that I didn't live an average life. And we're here this evening, of course, because, that's really what it's all about. Everybody says it over and over again, But Yechezkel really went on to live an exceptional life. And those are the conversations I used to have with him, when he was debating whether or not he should go into this business or that business, or whether he should this or that. And I said, Scotty, I'm sorry, that's how I knew. I said, Scotty, what are you doing? You know you're good at working with people. This is where you should go, this is what you should do, and that's what you should pursue. You know what I mean? He was going to do something special. And Baruch Hashem, every one of us are going to have our challenges, and life is not going to go our way. For those of us who are still here, we're going to have our own challenges, we're going to have things that are going to be difficult, and it's going to be up to us to be able to face them, to be able to make our lives as meaningful as possible in order for us to be able to go on and do something special in this world. And Yortzeit Hashem, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will give us the koyach and the wisdom to see what we're supposed to do and how to achieve it.
This song was it's in memory of Yechezkel Goldberg. The song is in memory of Yechezkel Goldberg. It's in memory of this way. We'll get you a copy with pleasure. I can see what they will tell you. Very good. So I missed getting a hug from you at the time. 23rd, Monday night. Simply for you and your children in the clouds. I tell my father, I said to my father, I said, I can't believe it, it's my first child getting engaged. I said, I'm getting a Zadie before I even see it. Someone looked at my hand and said,
on. Right, let's not get you on.
Oh, me?
That's very good. Just, yeah, let's take.
Oh,
let me take
I don't want to be in it. Esther.
Esther, why not?
We're supposed to talk?
Yeah, you can say.
Hello. Thank you, Dr. Glassman, for videoing the evening. And do I still have to stay?
Now we took up the crowd. Guys, got in the video?
Stop, Razor, stop.
Who wants to give a message on the video?
Not me.
You want to say something? They already
Holding a gun. Me too.
But it's not.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Keep the camera in hand.
What do I supposed
You know,
to say?
you can say anything. You can say anything.
Ask when is the quick man.
I'm into freeze now. Things are coming restaurants too. And it's a summer hope that by next year my father will be here to talk at his own past Yortzeit and which is also Yes.
Let me take a big
It's
chance.
not such a weird bracha, is it?
No, it's not at
I don't think
all.
so.
It's wonderful.
It's in my eye.
That is wonderful. Okay, you know, maybe you should have the whole family.
Maybe.
Should we,
Try.
should we organize just one with the whole family?
What?
Like, the whole family together.
No, my kids said you put them in the Oh, it's fine. Okay, it's okay. Why are you doing this?
So nice to be seen. Let me just take a view all of you.
Everybody come in and say a short. Come here.
Remember, say a little message
What?
while you in the background.
Thank you for videoing.
That's
That's it.
What can I say? Here we are 5 years later.
It's hard to believe it's 5 years.
It's hard to believe it's 5 years. And Yechezkel should be a man social for me, the kids, close friends, and all of Am Yisrael. And Mashiach should come really soon. And we should do some amazing.
Good, amazing.
I got some fire.
do you want to sing it again? You do it so well. Can we have it again? Let's have it again, once more. Can we start it again, guys? Okay, let's go once more. Let's put it on again. Okay, go, we're starting. Okay, are we ready? Have a look. Go like this. It was amazing.
This one, this is South Brokerage. Now, do you know this is the least used British man in attendance? Nothing wrong with the bridge. Well, it was when they built it. They forgot to put the main approach roads in. So honestly, try and find this bridge in London. We have the lights from London, and try and find a manufacturing. Now you take a look up there. It's empty, it's not actually in a rush hour. It's professional drivers. Now once again I do say, if you do see any pedestrians